Rob Venn here, and today we're going to be looking at the basics of auteur theory. I will link in the description below to some more advanced videos, but this will cover the basics. We're going to be specifically looking at auteur theory in relation to Alfred Hitchcock's film Vertigo and in relation to Francis Ford Coppola's film Apocalypse Now. Now, if we go back pre-World War II, in the early days of cinema, it was not taken seriously as an art form. It was a mass entertainment form. It was an amusement. And therefore it wasn't considered art. I mean, there was always this snobbery and cultural criticism between high and low art. Low art being stuff that's mass, that's popular, pop music, mainstream cinema, television, pulp novels, as opposed to high art, opera, Renaissance paintings, classical music. Okay. Another problem with film as an art form is it wasn't created by one person, it was created by a group of people. So, if you've got, a writer and a director and a producer and actors and all this other kind of stuff involved in the production of a film, then who's the artist there? Of course, theatre has exactly the same problem. Again, like photography, it was a technology-driven form. I mean, you needed lots of technology and lots of money to be able to make a film. This is conveniently ignoring the fact, of course, that all art requires technology and money to a certain extent. And you think about, your famous artists, Leonardo da Vinci required rich patrons to be able to fund them. But, it's by the by. The other thing about art is its mass reproduction ability. You can reproduce film over and over and over again. You can make multiple copies of it, prints. It can be shown in multiple cinemas at once to a mass audience at once. So it's considered too easily reproducible. But ultimately it all came down to the fact it appeals to the masses, the proletariat, the great unwashed, and not the upper classes. But all that started to change post-World War II in 1948. Alexandre Astuc, I don't know how you pronounce it. Anyway, he started to look at film in a much more serious manner. He says that cinema is quite simply a means of expression, just as all arts are. It's gradually becoming a language, a form by which an artist can express his thoughts exactly as he does an essay or a novel. That's why I would call this new age of cinema the age of the camera stilo. Camera stilo means camera pen. He's talking about the way in which a director would use a camera like a writer would use a pen. He's taking the technology out of the equation and just saying it's a means to an end. So, why should it stop film being an art form? Now, this was an influential theory, but it never really caught on. But it was the first time anyone started to take film seriously. That really changed with the French theorists in the 1950s. There was still is a massively influential French film magazine, Cahiers de Cinéma, which means notes on cinema. It was edited by André Bazin, and it was a fertile breeding ground for a lot of great film critics and writers, many of whom would later on go on to become filmmakers and form the core of the French New Wave of the 1960s, which completely revolutionized film. One of those filmmakers was Francois Truffaut, and in 1954 he started to talk about this idea of the auteur theory, that film is the product of certain artists. Now, he said that there are certain filmmakers who have got a clearly observable and identifiable personal signature that marks out their films as being completely different from anybody else's. They mentioned a number of them, many of which were mainstream Hollywood directors like John Ford and, of course, most importantly of all, Alfred Hitchcock. They said that even though these filmmakers were working within the mainstream of Hollywood, they were still able to fight against that system and put something personal in their movies. Francois Truffaut then went on later to interview Alfred Hitchcock, and was, as you can see on the right here in this image of Truffaut and Hitchcock, Truffaut left, Hitchcock right, in which he was pretty much single-handedly rescued Hitchcock's reputation. Hitchcock was seen as a great showman, a man, and he was one of the very few directors in those days that an audience member would know the name of. He was, he got his name above the title. That was very rare. Most people had no idea who directed a movie. But he was different. He was a showman. He had his TV series. Everybody recognised him. But he was seen as pulpy, mainstream, and, lowbrow. But it was Truffaut that made people realise that, Hitchcock was an artist. But that was European cinema. It wasn't until the 60s that the Americans started to take note of this. A friend of Truffaut's, Andrew Sarris, who was a very famous film critic, brought the theory to America and popularised it in that country. He said only a director could bring to bear the coherence of vision that gives birth to great art. So it was he who decided that the director was the person involved in filmmaking who was the auteur. Another thing that was important to remember about auteur theory is that it couldn't be someone who worked in the independent film industry. It had to be someone who worked within the Hollywood studio system, but fought against that system in such a way as to be able to put their own individual stamp into their movies, to make their films recognisable. So it's not something that really applies to independent or art house directors. This is something that is sort of like a stealthy way in which mainstream directors manage to get a sense of artwork into their mainstream Hollywood content. So he was basically, people like Sarris and Truffaut were championing the idea that certain directors have a easily identifiable set of tropes and traits that separate them from their contemporaries. The way in which you can look at a, let's say, Tim Burton movie and go, that's a Tim Burton movie. Nobody else makes movies like Tim Burton. You can do the same with someone like, Quentin Tarantino or someone like Wes Anderson. Their films are theirs and theirs alone. Nobody else makes films like them. They're clearly auteurs because they work within the mainstream Hollywood system. But not everyone drank the auteur theory Kool-Aid. Pauline Kael, an extremely famous American film critic, one of the most famous, I think she wrote for the Village Voice in New York, she hated this concept of auteur theory. She says, when a famous director makes a good movie, we look at the movie, we don't think about the director's personality. When he makes a stinker, we notice his familiar touches because there's not much else to watch. Basically, she was saying the film is the film. If a filmmaker is putting too much of their own personality into the movie, then it's distracting. It's the movie should stand for itself. It shouldn't be about the director. Another nice theory you can bring into this: the death of the author, by Roland, Barthes, 1967. He says the birth of the reader must be at the cost of the death of the author. Now, what does he mean by that? He's basically talking about the idea that an artist makes a piece of art. Now, the artist will put their own meaning into that artwork. That meaning might be deliberate and conscious, it might be unconscious, it might be subliminal, something they didn't even realise they were doing. But no work of art can be divorced from its means of production, from what was going on in the world, from the biography of the artists themselves, what happened in their life, what they were doing, their love life and their drug habit or whatever it is they've got. They may deny it, but it's true. But as soon as that art form is released to the public, then they have no control over its meaning anymore. We, the audience members, bring our own meaning to that work of art. We bring our own biographies, our own prejudices, our own ideas, our own thoughts, and we make it our own. We read things into it that the director may never even have imagined anyone would have thought of. But that's one of the great beauties of art. Art is what you want it to be. It's what it means to you that's more important than what it means to the director or the artist. Many artists, like David Lynch, refuse to talk about what their films are about because they're saying, well, what do you think it's about? That's what's important. So, in that respect, does auteur theory really matter if you're looking at it from a Roland Barthes point of view? There are other criticisms of auteur theory. I mean, Hollywood, especially in the days of the studio system, was an industry. They call it show business for a reason. It's show business, not show art. Okay? Hollywood films were made on a production line. Directors rarely had any choice about what film they made. They were handed a movie and told to make it. Scriptwriters, not like today, they didn't spend years and years and years hammering away at their own script, their own story. They were given a story and told to write it and said, you've got a week to do it. Right? So it was very much like an assembly line process in Hollywood. So there was no room for artistry in Hollywood. It's a product of big business. It's a reflection of the ideology of the capitalist system. Make them fast, make them cheap, make them profitable. Make them appeal to the largest, widest possible audience. In which case, as we said about auteur theory, art in cinema can only exist by virtue of an artist's struggle against this system. So you have to see these artists as being a product of that system and fighting against that system from within. Being able to put a sense of an artistic voice into their films, even though they had no choice about what they were making. In this 1957 essay, La Politique, the Auteur from Cahiers Cinéma, Truffaut said, in spite of commercial production, the director, like any other artist, was the sole author of the finished product. Was he, though? You know, and it nearly always was a he in those days. It's still today. It takes hundreds, even thousands of people, an entire industrial system to make films. What about the scriptwriter? What about the cinematographer? What about the producer? You know, we look at something like the Star Wars movies and we think of George Lucas. We don't think of who might have actually directed that movie. I mean, The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi weren't directed by George Lucas, but we still think of him as the auteur of the Star Wars movies. It was a product of his imagination. You look at people like Ray Harryhausen, special effects artist. Who knows who directed Valley of the Gwangi or any of those movies? We remember them as Ray Harryhausen movies. The expression of certain intentions carried out by an individual who was by virtue of his or her struggle against the industrial system of production in order to express his or her personal concerns. That is what makes an auteur, an artist struggling within the system. If film is art, then it must be the expression of an individual artist. That's another key tenet of auteur theory. There has to be an artist. One only. In Hollywood, the artist becomes an isolated figure struggling against external forces. Again, the money men usually. Hollywood, because of its commercial nature, must produce auteurs as often, if not more so, than so-called art cinema. Again, the artist is defined by his struggle. If he doesn't have to struggle, they're arguing, he's not really an auteur. That means he's not an artist, but he's not an auteur. Again, Politique de l'auteur, by locating art in mainstream cinema, began to break down the distinction between art and popular cinema. It gave us a way for the first time to be able to study film as a work of art, because a work of art needed an artist. This breakdown in distinction between high and low culture has led to a greater analysis and attention to cinema. as well as the development of other things like genre theory that allows us to study films that aren't necessarily the work of an artist, but it doesn't mean to say they're not important. The critique seeks out directors' meanings even where they are not always obvious or given. So, it's like saying that, it's just a Western, how can it be a work of art? Well, then go, yes, well, it reflects the director's political opinions. Like the film High Noon being really about the House Un-American Activities Commission, McCarthyism, not really about cowboys. And they elevated the status of cinema and located cinema at the centre of contemporary art criticism. It allowed, and this is the great thing about auteur theory, it allowed film to be taken seriously. So whether you agree with the auteur approach or not, it at least did that. So, what are its advantages? It allows film to be studied as a work of art. It makes film legitimate as an art form, not just mass entertainment product. It allows us to study a great film artist who create great works of art. And it allows us to understand concerns, ideas and themes that are consistent across an auteur's body of work. Many directors, many auteurs will be having the same themes and ideas and obsessions in their movies over and over and over again, and we can see repeated patterns. Alright, but there are problems with auteur theory. For a start, it ignores the fact that film's a collaborative process that sometimes involves the creative input of thousands of artists and artisans. The director is not always the auteur. What about star producers like George Lucas, Joel Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer, who made all those 80s action movies? What about the writers? What about great writers like Aaron Sorkin? Never forget, films are mass-produced industrial products. That's even more obvious today than as there has been. I mean, just look at the sequels, reboots, franchises that dominate American cinema right now, making it a pretty boring time for modern film. Directors, especially during the studio system, had very little choice over what films they made. They were basically told to make what they were told to make, whether they liked it or not. And what about films that aren't works of art? What about all the other films? Are they not worthy of study? That's where genre theory comes in. Right, that's a very quick rundown of auteur theory. I say quick, it was over 70 minutes long. But covers all your basics, okay? Next video, we'll have a look at what made Hitchcock specifically an auteur, and also link to some stretch and challenge, extra viewing videos for you to have a look at as well. Do a bit of research on auteur theory, do a bit of Googling, get down the library, look at some books. Any questions, you know where I am. Talk to you next time.